We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland off today. Joining me now, David Dayen, executive editor at the American Prospect, Matt Stoller of the American Economic Liberties Project, and of course, author of the big newsletter on SubStack, to talk about their new show. Let me just say this, and this is coming from Imer Duber. Listen to Organized Money this morning. Amazing insight and journalism into how business actually works and how regulatory tweaks can help workers, like considering labor competition, job losses during antitrust cases. True or false, guys?
One person can't be wrong.
There you go.
It's clearly sweeping the nation.
This is exciting. I'm actually very, very excited about your podcast. And I don't generally listen to shows very much. I don't know. I woke up in the middle of the night last night and I thought like,
I don't like when people are just talking to me through a microphone. That's not what I like. I've made my career out of it, but that's not what I like to do. Is that what you're saying?
I'm too busy. I don't think I'm not gonna. I hear enough of it, but I really
I don't see why you have to pay full attention when you're doing your show. You're not really dealing with much.
But I think what Sam
put it in your ear.
What Sam is pointing to is something real, which is, I don't know, like there are a lot of really interesting content out there, but there isn't much like what we're doing, which is to try to look at business from the perspective of people who are trying to compete in markets and who are dealing with power, right? That's like the point is that we have a very monopolized economy and there are a lot of people, I mean, we're all enmeshed in it. And what we do is we talk to people who are actually, trying to deal with that situation, building businesses, making some money, trying to help people, but looking at corruption and power. And that's actually how the world really works. It's not like we kind of started it because we don't like the way that CNBC approaches business. We think it's much more interesting than that. And so I think to your point, like I didn't see, one of the reasons we wanted to start is because there's nothing else out there like it. So that's kind of like, it's something I wanted to listen to.
Yeah, it's a corrective. Like, I mean, it's there's a lot of business shows. It is usually right wingers who are either just interested in corporate power or scolding people for being in debt. With that said, I had an alternate name for it, Patman and Robin, but that the only person I thought who would laugh at that would be you two guys. All right,
so the right
Organized Money is obscure
enough. It's
exactly. From a 1936 speech by FDR. We're already down the obscure road. Then
actually,
going
you should
to
have done
a congressman. That would be even
Patman
worse.
and Robinson.
Oh, that would have been good.
There you
go.
Nice.
That's all right. But let's honestly, you've already come out with a couple of episodes. And obviously, you two have both written books in the antitrust space. And I think hopefully by now our audience has heard from both of you enough to realize that we have been in a fundamentally different era than we have been for the past 50 years in terms of antitrust, which was dominated by this Borkian University of Chicago perspective on what constituted antitrust. David, talk about the sort of like, there's the business aspect, but there's also like, it is integrating business and democracy in a way, like thinking of business in its role in our society. Just talk about that for a moment.
Well, I think that's why we wanted to do the first episode in a way to look back at how the world worked before this new regime came in. We did an episode about Google. Now, Google right now has lost 2 antitrust cases just recently, showing that they did engage in anti-competitive behavior. There are remedies that are being put forward, all up to and including potentially breaking up the company. And we look back at the fact that in the first term of the Obama administration, the exact same issues were being considered in a potential antitrust case. in 2011, 2012. And the way Google worked its way out of that was through this huge lobbying campaign, but it wasn't like a normal lobbying campaign. It wasn't the way where they just knock on the door of the FTC and say, "Hey, you can't do this. Please don't sue us." It was through peer pressure tactics and these weird cultural signifiers where they would just have the friends of the FTC commissioner say, "Oh, that case is terrible. Only an idiot would bring that case forward." Right?
The mean girls strategy.
Right, the mean girls strategy. And that is kind of what dominated the kind of cultural way that we regulated and enforced our economy over this 40-year period. Basically, there was this whisper campaign that said, no, actually, it's cool when people merge. It's cool when we have dominant corporations. That's the right way of thinking. That's the way of the world that should be. That's the natural order of things. And so we thought it was important to sort of step back before we step forward and show how things are changing. And so I think that's why we ended up with that episode as the initial episode. Wouldn't you say, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that, Google, I don't really have anything to add, but you pointed to me, so I feel like the need to talk.
Now you have to fill space.
Well,
this is how good we are at podcasting.
Yeah, this is. You guys can edit
exactly
this. You edit your podcast, though, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
unbelievable chemistry.
Well, well, I mean, but let's talk about it. But I mean, more broadly, I mean, that sense of and Matt, much of your work over the past half a dozen years, I think at least now, has been sort of dedicated to this growing antitrust movement. And how did it change? Like, I mean, how, like, not, I know that we at the very least now, and I want to talk about how durable this moment is, but we're in a very different moment, right? I mean, than we were under Trump, but also under Obama and under Bush and under Clinton, for that matter, and under Reagan. How does that happen? Like, how does a revision of the way that monopoly is conceived of in a country change?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think the answer is that there is a revolt within business, right? So traditionally, like since the 1970s, the left, the liberals have kind of said, we're kind of for consumers and workers and not business, right? But actually, if you look at, and that was new in the 70s. It used to be that we're for labor and business against monopolies and finance. That was the traditional coalition. And so what happens when you say, I'm against business, I'm for consumers and workers, is every small business in the country says, well, screw you, I'm going to be a Republican, right? Which is not how it used to be. And I think we all respect, we go to farmers markets. There's a difference between a farmers market and a derivatives market. Like, they're very different things. Just because they both include the term market doesn't make them the same political institution. And that model, I think, on the left and the right really failed, or maybe not failed. It delivered oligarchy, right? And that is, I think, what we're living in. We're living in a kind of more consolidated oligarchical system. And what we've done over the last, I think, 10 years, and I say we, I mean just me. No, I mean like a broad sort of reaction, honestly, to the financial crisis, right? The 2000, too big to fail banks is an anti-monopoly phrase, right? It just organically happened. We've said, hey, you know what? This whole model of thinking about, being pro-consumer and worker and anti-business doesn't make any sense. Like, what business person is pro too big to fail bank? It's not a good framework. So we started making an argument that, look, the way we do business it's not pro or anti-business. It's just that the way we do business is in part the way we do justice. And so we need to think that way. And I think that kind of argument is fairly appealing. And it's fairly appealing to a lot of people in, economic positions that we wouldn't normally consider progressive, like a whole bunch of executives are pretty frustrated with what's going on, middle managers, and it gives them a language to talk, or pharmacists. I mean, one of our next week we're going to do some episodes on like actual small business owner pharmacists engaging in protests against certain monopolies. Like that's a different form of politics. And I think that the financial crisis and then Trump coming in and really shaking things up, it really sort of indicated to the establishment, look, this whole old framework doesn't make any sense. And I think some of the newer voices, and this would be people like Lina and Jonathan Cantor and Elizabeth Warren, and some people on the right too, have really kind of illustrated, wait a second, there's a different way to think about political power. And we're trying to close the door. I think we have closed the door on that 40-year period. It doesn't necessarily mean things are going to get better. Things could get a lot worse, right? It's when you move away from neoliberalism, you could go very, very in a very dark direction. But I think we present an alternative that is actually a restoration of our democratic order. And it is through the lens of commerce, which is unusual. And that's kind of where we're trying to take organized money to try to tell that story.
I'm also interested, David, on like the idea that, were these judges, because we've seen judges now make rulings that we haven't seen judges make in decades. And was it just a question of like, they're just sitting there waiting until the government brings these cases?
Yeah.
Or is it, was it that simple?
Yeah,
or was it, I'm just thinking about it, having gone to law school for a year myself. And then,
So you're an expert.
I'm an expert at this. But I did, aside from like, I did get a sense.
I dropped out of law school.
I dropped out of law school, but I did get a sense.
I respect you for that much more than lawyers, but
no, but there was a clear sense of what was devalued in law school and what was not valued. Like anything that had to do with certain, you could just see it in terms of the credits. If you wanted to take, something that was not like sort of like as, and granted it was at BU, and which I didn't realize at the time was probably one of the most retrograde of these places, but anything that was, outside of what the legal principles were at that time, you'd get less of a credit, and then you wouldn't take that, and you were schooled in an ideology without even realizing it. And so I wonder, like, what were these judges doing when there was no cases coming to them? Like, how did that flame stay alive in them through that era?
I do think it's true that there was a long period where judges just never heard these arguments. They were never forced to think about them in any real way. And what you did have were things like the law and economics seminars where they would get indoctrinated in sort of the one way of thinking about these things around whether it's a consumer welfare standard or just a hands-off attitude generally towards mergers. That's what judges sort of were born and raised on. And so, yeah, there's a lot of weird rhetoric around this kind of scoreboard politics that goes on. Like, hey, Lina Khan lost 2 cases, so obviously the way that she thinks is completely wrong. This just kind of scoreboard watching. But, actually being willing to put forward those arguments, to force judges to reckon with them, actually pays dividends whether they lose in the beginning or not. And I think we've seen that throughout the evolution here, where as it turns out, FTC and DOJ has ended up now winning some cases. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, and also judges live in the real world too, right? If you're a judge and you use Google, right? And you're going to be like, oh, it's not a monopoly, right? What kind of person's going to say that? So, judges saw the financial crisis. The judges are people, right? And so in 2005, there are certainly judges who were saying, oh, law and economics is super cool and business is cool, and I don't want to do anything to disrupt that, who've changed their mind. Just like I think a lot of us changed our mind. I changed my mind over a number of years. And so the argument from, was, oh, like the judges are going to strike all this stuff down. We've seen judges have really good rulings in the Google cases, in a bunch of merger cases, one called IQVIA, another one which was a private right of action called Fubo. We've seen good rulings in like Ultimate Fighting Championships. There was a good ruling in the FTC's case against Amazon. There's like and there's also been bad rulings, right, from both Biden and Trump judges. But it is an interesting dynamic that once this stuff gets in the courtrooms and they have to look at the evidence as opposed to sort of these high-minded, like theoretical models, which is really what the law and economics school was meant to do. Let's not look at it in reality. Let's look at it in theory. Once you get away from that and start to do empirical work, it's pretty clear what's going on is monopolization, and you just have to find legal theories to map to that.
Yeah, and the other thing is the idea that courage is contagious. So ever since that Google case came down, the search case, where Google was found guilty of using its muscle to get onto phones, get onto browsers, and be the default setting, and basically make secret deals to muscle out competition. We have seen all kinds of other private rights of action over arrangements that are very similar. We mentioned on the pod at one point, Michael Jordan sued NASCAR. Michael Jordan, who has no ability, you would think, to be muscled by anybody, considering his stature and his money, he sued NASCAR over a very similar arrangement to what is in the Google case, having his stock car team muscled out of being able to participate in that business. So, when we see litigators say, look at DOJ or FTC and they say, hey, actually, you can make these arguments and you might be able to win. I think that builds on itself.
What does it do for the institutions, like for the FTC and the DOJ? I mean, to have 4 years of a ideology, if you will, of pursuing these things. What is the downstream impact of that for, if you're at law school or wherever it is? Matt, do you guys raise your hands on your own?
We do. No.
Okay, that's good.
We have
There's only two of you, but you're like
background.
Okay, good.
I just don't want to talk over David because I'm polite. I don't know what kind of show you're running, Sam.
I talk over people all the time.
Yeah, apparently. So a couple of things. One, it creates a whole new crop of lawyers, right? So there's, it's cool in law school, which apparently you went to, I'm told, but couldn't hack it.
I couldn't hack it.
Couldn't hack it.
You weren't good at it. Yeah.
Yeah. The antitrust is cool now. And even though the professors are generally hostile to what the FTC and DOJ are doing, they have to teach it, right? So if you're the antitrust law professor, you have to give them cases that are being brought by this FTC and DOJ. Before you could ignore it. And a lot of students wouldn't even know what was happening, but now they do. So, and they want to be Lina Khan, right? Or a lot of them do. And so
I just want to add, I've seen that. I just saw that last week personally. I was at the University of Utah at a conference, and these young law students were coming up to me and was like, "This is what I want to get into. This is what I want to do." With my life.
I've talked to George Mason law students who say that. I mean, these are people that are like law and economics, like that's the center of law and economics, and they really love what this FTC is doing. This is not a right or left thing. People get that when you sign up for Planet Fitness, like that's not cool the way that they trap you in. That's not okay, right? And this is well understood. So it's creating, I think, a new generation of lawyers, and they're now 4 years of experience seeing. Actually learning how to litigate cases. And I don't think you can understate that, because if you want a different governing arrangement, you need the lawyers and you need the bureaucrats who know how to do this. And so now we're starting to have that army of people who can. I think the other thing it's done is it said, one of my I think critiques of Obama is he was just like, well, what can I do about this problem? I'm just the president, right? I don't have any, Matt Iglesias used to talk about the Green Lantern theory of the presidency, saying, oh, the president can people just assume the president can do anything. But in fact, he's totally powerless. And what I think we've seen is, Trump did a bunch of stuff like on tariffs and he used power in certain ways. But I think what we've seen with the FTC and DOJ is that, in fact, if you have political leaders that want to do stuff, they can. And so the important sort of excuse that is given to voters, oh, we're just the government, what can we do? I think that's gone. I don't think you can say that anymore because you look at someone like a Lina Khan or a Jonathan Cantor or a Rohit Chopra or a Julie Su or a Pete Buttigieg, and you say, well, they actually had some levers and they pulled them. Why aren't you doing that? And the person might say, well, I'm not going to do it because I don't believe in it or whatever. But they actually have to engage in the conversation. So I guess let's finish it up by saying, let's say that Kamala Harris wins. And then let's say that she does fire Lina Khan. All right, which I don't think is going to happen. But let's say that does happen. Do you want to be the person that Kamala Harris nominates to be the chair of the FTC? Like, that is a really difficult, imagine filling those shoes, right? That's a very difficult framework than being, Obama's FTC chair, who was, probably no one knows, was Edith Ramirez and John Leibowitz.
Nobody knows.
They never got any scrutiny. No one knows who they are. But the next chair of the FTC, if it's not Lina Khan, it's going to be really famous one way or the other.
Well, I mean, go ahead, David.
I just want to follow up on that briefly because we actually have an upcoming episode that speaks to this. There is a political language now around these issues that candidates are starting to learn. We, in an episode we're going to run in a couple of weeks, talk to 3 candidates for Congress, and not necessarily the most liberal candidates for this, the people in swing seats, basically. And they are talking about corporate greed. They are talking about corporate price gouging. They are talking about how these things are relatable because they plug in to things happening in people's daily lives. And that is growing. I'm not going to say it's new, but it's growing, and it's growing along all sectors of at least on the Democratic side, it's growing among all segments of the caucus. And I think that's really notable. And that's another reason why, the whole Lina Khan discourse is interesting and maybe a bit silly, because you have the entire political spectrum of Democrats who are interested in maintaining that posture.
Well, I think the idea, I do think that the ability of the executive to do things is expanded by the discourse, which provides I don't want to say Overton window, but I think honestly, the work that you guys did and others to increase the imagination, I guess, from what was a dormant sort of vision of what antitrust could do, is what sets stuff like that up. I mean, there's no way we get this era of antitrust without sort of the runway that was created before there was power, right? I mean, I know, Matt, you spent a lot of time thinking about this.
Yeah, since we go back to the mid-2000s, let me talk about that for a second. One of the things that I look at the blogosphere of the early 2000s, back in the day,
come sit by the fire and I'll tell you about a world.
That's all this show is me talking to people who are 20 years younger than me about what we all did back when it was dial-up.
Right. Pemmican and hardtack.
Cat food commission.
All we could eat. When we started the blogs, right, and we were kind of anti-Bush, right? That was the vibe. And then Obama won, and Democrats took big majorities. And we really had no intellectual infrastructure. We didn't have any ideas about what we wanted to do. It was just, get the Republicans out and get more and better Democrats in office. And it turns out when you have no vision, it's very easy for the existing, status quo incumbents. It's almost inevitable that they will just do what they do, right? Which is exactly what, it just like the bankers just took over everything.
Who was it that said on the show, like, a plan is better than no plan, or
that
something
was Tim
to that?
Geithner. Plan
Tim Geithner said that, yeah.
But I think it's and I think a lot of the like, oh, we need to have more organizing, which is really just marketing. Like they're really all of those debates in the mid 2000s were just about how the better form, what way to market, right? How do we do sales? And we built it up into this big ideological debate, but it was really just what kind of like marketing tactics should we use? And then Obama campaign just was like, all right, fine, we'll use your marketing tactics. And they did. And to me, that was a massive failure. And it was an important failure because what I learned going into the financial crisis is, I spent years working on elections and campaigns and thinking about politics, and I never thought about banks, right? And turns out banks matter. And turns out corporations matter. Turns out business matters. And we hadn't thought at all about that. And so part of what happened, I think, is Dave was very important in building this argument, but a whole bunch of people were important in building this argument. Some of the net neutrality people, it was just kind of like saying, hey, you know what? We should probably have a vision of what kind of society we want to live in. That's not just what kind of marketing tactics campaigns should use. And I think that's where, and we started to build that coming out of the, during and out of the financial crisis. And that's where this came from, right? That was part of one of the places it came from.
And I think what's so interesting is that if you look today at the Harris campaign, they're certainly, looking to past tactics and using all of these sort of marketing ideas. But when Harris wants to talk about her record, when she actually wants to mention tangible things that the Biden-Harris administration did, almost to a man, every single one comes from Lina Khan's shop or Rohit Chopra's shop. She'll say, we abolish medical debt on credit reports. She'll say, we're going to go after price gouging. We're going to go after algorithmic price fixing in the rental markets. Even today, we're going to do a click to cancel rule, which is what Matt was talking about. The FTC finalized this today. That says for a subscription, like maybe a subscription to the Majority Report, it's got to be as easy to get out of it as it is to get into it.
We send notices every time we bill, incidentally. I just want to let you know.
I had no doubts. So the point is that, it's almost reversed, that this architecture, if you go back to the 2000s, the sort of movement had a bunch of ideas about organizing and no ideas about governing. And now the ideas about governing are there. And when the political establishment needs to prove that their time in office matters, they use our ideas about successes in government.
And Matt, you touched on this, but I think it really can't be overstated how nuts it is, or how unique it is that the most well-known person in that administration, in the Biden administration, I really think, I think, Blinken has done a good job of making himself infamous, but the idea that people know who the FTC chair is, that there is that people know who Lina Khan is like every day I'm sort of shocked by it. And how poorly the people who want her gone played this. How do you explain that dynamic?
Matt, talk about that, the Arizona thing.
First of all, so thank you, Reid Hoffman, for the marketing push for Lina Khan.
Honestly, yes,
well, okay.
Wow.
So first of all, I want to offer a slight corrective, because I think activists and people who pay attention to politics know who Lina Khan is. But I'd say if you did a poll, and I've seen polls, the cabinet members have high name ID. Lina Khan doesn't, right? Like 5% of the public knows who she is, maybe 10%.
So you think even 5 or 10? I don't know if it's 5 or 10%, even that much.
Okay. But like 40% of people have heard the name Pete Buttigieg. So let's not overstate how well known.
Former presidential campaign too. But go ahead.
Yeah, right. I just want to make it clear, she is not a household name. But okay, so this is really interesting. I talked to Chris Mays, who's the Attorney General of Arizona, and she's awesome. She did a press conference and she's brought a suit against this software company and consulting company called RealPage, which works with landlords to raise rent prices. So it's price fixing for rent. Like basically the rent is too damn high conspiracy. And she brought a case. So did the DOJ, and so did a bunch of states. But she brought one individually, and she did a press conference. And apparently, the press conference went viral. People were putting it up on TikTok. And now, when organizers go to knock on doors in Arizona, sometimes these are like Kamala Harris organizers or Ruben Gallego organizers, because Mays is not on the ballot. The voters will say, "Hey, are you with Chris Mays? I like her. I heard about that RealPage thing." And so they're saying that unprompted, right? So people at the doors are just bringing up an antitrust case. They don't know it's an antitrust case. They don't, but it's like, it's the first, that and the baby formula thing are like kind of we're starting to see organic responses from sort of the voting public. Like in the baby formula, that was the first time that monopoly started popping in the focus groups. But I think we see it at least in Arizona. I mean, this is what I heard from Mays. I haven't talked to organizers there myself, but that is like, there's a really interesting dynamic. And I think if you go into business, right, if you go into the tech industry, when Lina Khan went out to Silicon Valley, the executive class hates her, but she was like a rock star among the engineers. Right. And you talk, she goes to doctors and she's a rock star among doctors because they hate the certain aspects of these pharmaceutical middlemen that are making their lives hell. And you can see this in lots of different places. People are looking for it. These are not traditional progressive groups. In other words, pharmacists love her. Like, there's a very, very different vibe going on in politics, but it's not the traditional progressive, like, kind of union and nonprofit world. And we don't really know what that political architecture sort of looks like fully in terms of governing. This was kind of like, I think of the Biden administration as sort of an outline of what could be, but we didn't have the lawyers and the army and the full ideas. And we don't occupy most of the parts of government, but just showing, as you noted, like what someone at the FTC can do, because the FTC has fewer employees than the Smithsonian has guards. Right? Like,
is that true?
Right? It's like amazing. Astonishing. So anyway, all of which is to say, like, hopefully we like the New Deal was basically like Lina but everywhere, right? Lina Khan but everywhere, and that is, it would look very, very different. I can guarantee you, because as much as the FTC can do, it is still just like a $300-400 million agency in a $4 or $5 trillion government.
But isn't there also a connection? I mean, you mentioned it's not the union's nonprofit coalition, but at least within the context of like the reformer movement, union movement, right? Where like I'm thinking of Sean Fain, there is a bridge there in the sense that the fundamental principle around antitrust is about expansion of democracy, right? Yeah. Is it empowering? It is basically flattening out the power structure on some level. And presumably, too, that is what good unionism does, and certainly represented by Fain in this instance, in the sense that this is a more a union that is less sort of top down, less managerial. That's the way you expand, right? To get more Lina Khans around.
Well, I think that's certainly true. I think there are complications to it, but I think let's talk about where that's true. I mean, our second episode, and let's not be idiots, organizemoney.fm. You'll get every episode. You can find.
Oh, you went with the .fm, did you? That's interesting. Yeah. I've noticed. Okay, that's all right.
Only follow the best. We only follow the best, just like the Majority Report. You can find it on Apple. You can find it on Spotify. Look for Organized Money. I guess we're on the app there. So, our second episode, we talk about the Kroger-Albertsons trial, and what was novel about it is that, under the consumer welfare standard, you're only supposed to look at whether prices are affected by a merger, right? In this case, One of the things that the FTC is arguing is they're saying that even though both Kroger and Albertson are unionized companies, that if you merge them together, it will actually be harder for organizers to play one side off of the other in terms of a bargaining arrangement. If they're bargaining for a new contract, they could no longer say, actually, shoppers, you should go to the Albertsons across the street, and that will create leverage for us to get a better contract. Now, if they're merged, you can't say go across the street. They'd all be out. And this would be more difficult for them to bargain effectively. And we've seen this added to, for example, the Simon and Schuster Penguin Random House case, which was about workers, in this case authors, not being able to get as high advances from, if there are multiple, if there's only one company out there, the advances wouldn't be as high relative to if there are multiple companies. It was a monopsony argument.
Right.
So we're seeing those kinds of things incorporated into the antitrust framework. So I think that, yes, labor and the antitrust world are working effectively together. But Matt, you might complicate that.
I'd like to cite an old book to sound smart. Okay, if
sure.
I can. So John Milton in the 1600s talked about liberty, and he said that absolutist kings would induce the perpetual bowings and cringings of an abject people and force them to shape their noble words and actions, heretofore so becoming the majesty of a free people, into the base necessity of court flatteries and prostrations. He was basically talking about the movie Office Space, right? Like, that's the gist of it. It is so humiliating to live in a society where you have no power in commerce, right? We talk, you might be able to vote, but it's sort of ornamental, because if Bill Lumbergh can boss you around, you don't really have power. And one way to think about unions is one way to think about law in general is like you have a whole set of legal protections that America put in place up until the 1970s to protect our ability to be a free people. And this includes unions, which work in certain industrialized frameworks, but are not always the right solution for every part of the economy, but they can work in a lot of places. You have copyright, which was supposed to protect artists. You have patents, which were supposed to protect engineers and scientists. You had farm supports to protect the independent farmer and land restrictions. You have like a whole bankruptcy law. You have a whole series of antitrust law, a whole series of laws that are designed to make it so that we don't have to be bossed around. We don't have to be cringing and fawning people. And I think that's what we're trying to get at. It's about, whether you're on a phone tree, like where you have to talk to someone who's as equally miserable as you are, and you can't help you because they're disempowered and you're disempowered, or you're some AI chatbot, or whether it's someone at work who treats you like crap, or whether you're an entrepreneur and you're getting coerced by a monopolist, or whether you're a worker and you have no grievance process. That's a very different society from one where you can launch a new product and get it onto the shelves and get access to the courts and all of. So it's about shaping a society where we actually are free people. And I think that's the fundamental connection between unions and antitrust, is they're both about freedom from fear. And just to say, just to close with, organized money is the name of our podcast, and organized money came, I don't know if he said this, but it's a phrase that Franklin Delano Roosevelt used when he said, government by organized money is as dangerous as government by organized mob. And I think that really gets to it, right? Like, we want a society that is free, where we are free people, both in at the ballot box and in the marketplace.
There's one quote that Zephyr Teachout, when she was running for Congress, told me that I think speaks to this perfectly. And she said, Republicans say you're out of power, and you're out of power because of the government, or maybe because of immigrants lately, or something like that. And for too long, Democrats said, no, you're not out of power. You're fine. And what her message was, yes, you are out of power. And it's because of Bill Lumbergh. It's because of Bill Lumbergh from Office Space. So that kind of encapsulates it.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.